Speaker, 2 days ago, along with their fiscal update, the federal government released changes to the Fiscal Stabilization program. After decades of contributions by Alberta to the rest of Confederation, amounting to more than $630 billion net, Ottawa has once more failed Albertans with this almost token measure that does not address the underlying unfairness of the current system. As a result, Alberta is losing out on nearly $4.6 billion, dollars that Albertans have paid for many times over, and dollars that we need to help address our current economic challenges. To the Premier, what is your reaction to these changes?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, Alberta is deeply disappointed with the announcement about only modest changes to the Fiscal Stabilization program. All 13 provinces and territories had called for the federal government to create fiscal fairness, recognizing the oversized role that Alberta has played in the prosperity of the Federation, and yet we got 10% of the ask that was not just made by Alberta, but by every province and territory, shortchanged by $4.6 billion for the province that's done the heavy lifting in the history of the Federation. Mr. Speaker, this is a slap in the face for the people of Alberta.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the Premier for his response. Given that Alberta asked for the cap to be removed, and given that Alberta will now only receive roughly $750 million of the estimated $3 billion that Alberta would have been eligible for without this unfair and arbitrary cap, to the Premier, what message will Alberta send to Ottawa on why the full elimination of the cap is necessary to address our concerns and properly reciprocate Alberta's long-standing outsized contributions to Confederation?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank the member for Calgary Southeast for his question, and he's right, $3 billion shortchanged for this fiscal year. But, Mr. Speaker, the unanimous request of provinces and territories was for a retroactive lifting of the cap to 2015 to recognize the crash in revenues then, and so we have been shortchanged by $4.6 billion. And let's be clear, this is not Albertans getting out a begging bowl. We don't look for welfare as a province, Mr. Speaker. We look for fairness. And that is money that we have put into the rest of the Federation, $600 billion in net contributions over the past 6 decades.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that up until 2020, Alberta has been a net contributor to the Federation for every year that equalization has existed, and given that even through these challenging times our province has faced since 2015, we have still been net contributors in excess of $15 billion a year, and given that Alberta is now facing the most challenging economic circumstances that we have seen since the Great Depression, can the Premier explain to Albertans why it is necessary for Ottawa not only to remove the cap, but also to make retroactive fiscal stabilization payments to correct for the unfairness of recent years?
The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, it's necessary because a strong Canada needs a strong Alberta. As I've said before, imagine if we saw a fiscal and economic meltdown in the auto sector impacting Ontario, in the aviation sector in Quebec. You know that the national media would focus on that as story number one, and the Government of Canada would be all over it. And yet, this province that has done so much, this province, look at these flags of all the other provinces and territories. Think about the hundreds of thousands of Albertans from across the country. This Canadian province deserves to have, for Canada to have its back, just as we've helped our fellow Canadians for 6 decades.